So, this is the story of my open heart surgery. Summed up as concise and best as I can. I'm gonna try to hit the key details, and we'll go from there. So, yeah, today I have a story for you guys that, of course, involves yours truly. The subject matter is pretty heavy, so I want to give you all a fair warning. If you have a weak stomach or don't like hearing about medical procedures or healing processes, this might not be the best video for you. I'll try my best to avoid talking too much in detail about the gross aspects, the best that I can. With that out of the way, let's get going. How do I start? I guess I'll start with, I've always considered myself a fairly tough person. Not to toot my own horn, but genuinely and generally speaking, if I happen to feel kind of crappy or super tired or get headaches or feel kind of nauseous, at least pre-COVID, I usually try to just suck it up and sleep it off. Let's take, for example, at some of my prior jobs. Let's say I'm at work and start to feel kind of sick or feel off. My logic has always just kind of been, if I can get through this day, I can get home, get some food in my stomach, some water, some rest, sleep, relax, whatever, unwind, and I feel like usually I'd recover just fine. And up until this point in my life, it's worked for me. I prided myself in my work ethic at some points in my life. I've worked up to 4 jobs at once, working, 80, 90-hour work weeks just to survive while I was living in the city in Boston and Allston. I would literally work. I'd start at Friday mornings at around 5 a.m., and I'd work either until midnight on Sunday or 5 a.m. on Monday, depending on the weekend, and this was pretty much every consecutive weekend for a while. Granted, I'd take a day or two off afterwards to sleep straight through, no exaggeration, to catch up on that sleep. Renting in Boston's really expensive, but that's a whole different story. Anyway, I really, like I said, I really never take time off, vacation or sick. There was a day in late winter where I was working, feeling pretty crappy. I had cold sweats, I was nauseous, I couldn't keep food down, even water. I tried taking Tylenol, I couldn't keep that down. I finished my day at work, and if I recall, I ended around 5, and this is at my previous job, not my current one. I got home and almost immediately went to sleep. I woke up the next morning and felt even worse. I wasn't able to keep food or water down still for a full 24 hours. And at that point I was throwing up, I was sweating, I was sore all over my body. I didn't sleep well at all. I could tell there was no way I was going to make it to work that day. And at that point I really hadn't called out, from what I remember, genuinely for at least 3 years from any of my jobs at that point, but I was so sick on that day that I did end up calling out. I knew I had the 2 days after that off, so with those days like combined off, I was hoping that with sleep and rest, I'd start to feel better. So that's usually, like I said earlier, how it would go. I'd get some rest and feel better, but this time it just didn't happen that way, unfortunately. So the next day I woke up and I felt even worse. I was dizzy, I could barely stand. I still hadn't been able to keep down any food or water at all. I felt really, really crappy. I was still throwing up, and at that point, my girlfriend was getting worried. She saw how sick I was feeling, and she knew that no matter how sick I am, I don't really usually show it. I kind of just internalize it as best as I can. But she saw how I was hurting, and, you know, she noticed that I had called out of work, obviously. We talked about it. And she made me promise that if I hadn't felt better by the next day, that I'd go to urgent care. And, of course, that day came and went. And when I woke up that next day, I still couldn't keep down any water. So, you know, I was still throwing up. I was still really sick. So at this point, I was severely dehydrated. I was nauseous. I was weak. I was dizzy, which made it hard to walk straight. You know, I hadn't been able to keep down any food or water for almost 3 days. And my girlfriend finally convinced me to go into my local urgent care. Keep in mind, at this point, I honestly hadn't been to a doctor for anything in probably 10-ish years. That's no exaggeration. I don't like going to the doctors. Here in the US, at least, it's very expensive, and not generally a comfortable or easy process, even with insurance. I just never liked really going, but my girlfriend convinced me to go because it was getting dangerous how sick I was feeling. So the first time I went, I saw this older woman doctor. She was probably in her late 50s. I described my symptoms over the last few days to her, and ultimately she ended up giving me some antibiotics and sent me on my way. She seemed to think it was just some kind of bug that would easily be killed by, like, azithromycin, which is a kind of, like, medium-tier antibiotic here in the US, which is usually what, you know, makes me feel better. Usually that advice works fine, but I knew this was a little different. I could just tell by how my body was feeling. But of course, that's the advice she gave me, so that is the advice that I followed. Even though, you know, I had my doubts, I listened to her, and that's what I tried to do. I voiced the concern to her. I told her I might not even be able to keep them down. I hadn't been able to keep down even a sip of water, like even like a water bottle cap full of just drinking water to try to keep down a little bit of water. I couldn't do it. But she seemed to think I was like embellishing or exaggerating. I guess she doesn't know or understand my baseline, but that must be what she thought. She suggested, you know, oh, maybe try taking some crackers with it or something along those lines. So I did. I followed her advice. I stopped at the pharmacy on the way home. I picked up my prescription. I tried to take the first dose of the antibiotics with some saltines, just like she suggested. And almost immediately, I started to throw that up. I went home and I tried to sleep through the next day again. I woke up the next morning, tried to take the azithromycin again. Same thing. I went back to the urgent care office. This time, luckily, I say luckily, it was a different doctor. It was a younger man, probably in his early 30s, and he seemed to take me much more seriously. Granted, this time it had been another day. I was returning, and I feel like he could really just see the pain and the sickness in my face. He suggested I go to one of my local hospitals for at least IV fluids and multiple kinds of tests. He did this after running multiple kind of tests himself there at the urgent care, including an x-ray that showed some kind of abnormality in my lungs. Like I said, and I felt like he could just kind of sense that something was seriously wrong in my body. He asked if there was any possibility I had been shot, like with a gun, and in my head, I was like, no. This stemmed from the fact that, you know, they saw with the x-ray or whatever scan that they did that they had some kind of abnormality in my lung, but they couldn't tell what it was, just saw like a vague shape of what it was. And so he asked if there was any way I could have had a bullet in my lung, or if I inhaled a bullet, or if I had been shot. And I was like, no, I felt around. I don't think I've ever been shot. Never in my life, never before. I'm not shot right now. I'm not bleeding. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of humorous. But I was fairly fairly certain I had never been shot, but I took his advice, and I went to the local hospital around here, which is known as Newton Wellesley. It's a really great hospital in Massachusetts. They put me up in a room, and immediately they hooked me up to IV fluids and started running a ton of blood tests, a ton of, just tests in general. I was really, really sick at this point. I could very honestly barely walk at all. I was so dehydrated, I hadn't kept food down in days. I had already lost a ton of weight. I'm sure I was super pale, just dripping sweat. And they ended up almost immediately with the test they ran, noticing something was severely wrong, and they gave me almost immediately gave me 3 blood transfusions. They kept me there for 3, 4, maybe 5 days, something along those lines. Just analyzing the different x-rays, medical imaging, blood tests, monitoring my symptoms. The blood transfusions did help a little bit, and because I was on IV fluids and antibiotics and stuff, my symptoms did get slightly better, but they could tell that something was still seriously wrong with me. They weren't really sure. They know that I had something going on in my lungs, just like the doctor at the urgent care had said. They had some kind of abnormality in there, and they could tell that I had some kind of infection in my blood. They basically said that they're going to send me to somewhere where they can do some more in-depth testing and procedures, and suggested that I stay on high-strength IV antibiotics and fluids, and then they sent me to what I consider the best hospital in my area in Massachusetts, which is Brigham and Women's Hospital. It's arguably one of the best hospitals in the world. Widely regarded as one of the most advanced. They have some of the best, most high-end equipment, doctors, labs, stuff like that that money can buy. And I am extremely grateful, lucky, and blessed to live in Massachusetts, A, where this hospital just happens to be located, and B, just be in a situation where I'm able to receive this level of in-depth medical care, and honestly, ultimately, I have no doubt in my mind that without it, I wouldn't be here today. I mean that. So I arrived at Brigham's, and they hooked me up to a ton of machines immediately and started running a bunch of tests, just like they did at Newton Wellesley. They almost immediately put me on a medication called Heparin, which is like a super strong blood thinner. They had some really high-level, well-regarded doctor look at my imaging, and he was fairly certain that I had a blood clot in my lung. It's called a pulmonary embolism, technically. And along with the fact that I had a severe infection in my blood that was constantly circulating through my body. And these were the two main things, along with a infected valve in my heart, which they weren't really fully aware of yet at that point, but those were the main factors of what was causing my illness. But they put me on Heparin, like I was saying, which is a really strong blood thinner, and they were doing that to hope that it would help the pulmonary embolism, or the blood clot in my lung. The three main problems with Heparin, at least in my opinion, were that, first off, it's an IV medication. So the entire time I was in the hospital, I had to be hooked up to at least that IV line at that point in time, which is painful of itself. Obviously, anyone who's ever had, shots or any blood drawn or anything like that knows that, an IV line is a needle in your arm, and it's painful. And, when you're doing a longish stint in a hospital, it leads to a bunch of other pretty annoying issues. Like, you know, obviously, when you have a needle in your arm, it's hard to sleep, rolling around. It's overall uncomfortable just having it in your arm. And the second big problem was that it has severe interaction problems with a bunch of other drugs that potentially could have helped heal my other conditions. Especially, people and doctors are very careful with giving it in conjunction with a lot of antibiotics, which, if you remember, were pretty important due to the fact that I had a super severe infection in my blood. And third, and probably the worst, being that this medication is a blood thinner. They have to really monitor your levels to make sure your blood pressure and stuff like that doesn't fall too low. And to do that, what they do is they have your blood taken 4 times a day. And no, I'm not exaggerating. I do mean 4 times a day. It's not a lenient thing. It's not something where you can be like, oh, I'll only take 1 or 2 tests a day. No, they do test and force you to test your blood 4 times a day. At this point, I wasn't hooked up to any PICC line or drawing line or anything like that. I just had the IV for the medications and the fluids that I needed in my body. So what that means is that you know, they're waking you up once, sometimes twice every single night to do this. If you think about it, 4 times a day means, you know, 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m., midnight. And that was minimum. Sometimes they had to, you know, and I was sick, so they were drawing other extra tests a lot of days. And so I feel like this really did a number on my body. I've always had issues sleeping, but being woken up every single night with no reprieve, no matter what, it's a certain special kind of torture. So I was in the hospital after this being monitored. They're, you know, constantly drawing tests in labs, and giving them to different doctors and medical teams for them to analyze to try to figure out if they could do... So at this point, they had realized that the infection in my blood did serious damage to what's called the tricuspid valve, which is a mitral valve in your heart. That helps regulate the blood flow, helps pump blood throughout your body from your heart. And they were trying to analyze if they could do a tricuspid valve replacement at that time. Due to the fact, you know, the infected blood did a lot of damage to that particular valve. Some of my medical team, mainly the infectious disease team that was on my case, thought that the damage was severe enough to need surgery at that point. But after several months of isolation, testing, having so much pain in my lungs that I was literally unable to walk without having a very serious breathing attack, the doctor that would need to do the surgery, like the heart surgeon himself, refused to do it at that point in time. He had multiple reasons behind this. He said that, you know, for one, I was at higher risk for complications and an infection due to the fact that I had just had serious lung surgery done, which I'll get into in a minute here, as well as he said the damage wasn't severe enough. He was worried about how young I was, because, you know, they'd have to replace my heart valve and do fairly serious surgery involving my heart. And so what they did do at this point is they did 2 different lung surgeries. This was mainly to help the pulmonary embolism in my lungs subside. And at first they tried one with me awake, where I remember they took some kind of thin tube and pretty much drilled a hole through the slot in 2 of my ribs and stuck a tube into my lung. And the point of this was to try to drain some of the fluid that the blood clot had caused to collect in my lungs over, you know, the few months that I had been in the hospital at that point. and I was awake for the procedure through the entire thing, and they didn't really give me any pain meds or anything. I think they gave me like an Ativan to try to relieve the anxiety, but other than that, it was, you know, stone cold sober, and it was extremely painful to the point where they eventually stopped. Before this, you know, like I said, I accrued quite a bit of fluid in my lungs, and through this procedure, you know, even though it did help drain a lot of the fluid, there was still a decent portion left, and the clot was still visible, which triggered them to schedule me for a second more in-depth lung surgery, which was, you know, scheduled in order to hopefully get rid of most of the blood clot itself. And luckily for this one, I was put under anesthesia. And it was also to try to, you know, drain the remaining fluid, because there was still some fluid left after kind of the failed first surgery. After the second attempt, the hospital ultimately decided to try to discharge me so I could recover from home, which even then sounded dangerous to me. You know, I knew that I could barely walk at that point in time. I had lost so much muscle in my leg. It's really not an exaggeration. Any walking that I had to do in that point in time, I had to have a full-on, like, two-hand, old person style, like, walker, just to get from my bed to the bathroom. And, you know, they planned to, and did eventually put me on what's called a PIC IV line, and they did that for my antibiotics, which is pretty much it's a really thick IV needle, intravenous needle, and what they do is they stick it in your arm, and it's a real thick needle, and they find your, like, main vein that circulates through your arm, and they stick it in, like, deep and kind of, like, hook it in there, so that they can, you know, go in and connect, like, whatever IV medicine bag you need to it, and so they install that in your arm, and it's meant to stay in for, you know, up to, like, you know, a few months, ultimately, and it makes it so you can carry around your meds. It's got, like, a really small, kind of like the size of, like, a phone, computer that is used to analyze, monitor, help, you know, put out the exact amount through the IV that's needed when it's needed. So they gave me that, and they, you know, it was really interesting, but it's certainly dangerous and really painful. And you have to have a nurse come to your house every, you know, 2-ish days to take a look at it and make sure that it's okay. Along with that, they sent me home with at-home oxygen. I had a big tank in my house, or like a big oxygen generator in my house, and I had oxygen tubes going into my nose that would help me breathe, because my lungs were still so damaged from, even though after the surgeries, I was still having trouble breathing because there was still a clot, that ultimately blood thinners were supposed to help subside, but for the time being, I was still having a lot of trouble breathing. And so they put me on the oxygen, so I always had to carry around an oxygen tank or be hooked into the oxygen generator at my house, so I always had to have the oxygen going just to breathe. And then also I also had to carry around the IV bag of medicine that was hooked into my arm. Everywhere I went, those I had to have those. And so I had a service that would come to my house for to change out oxygen tanks, and they had at-home nursing. So they discharged me with that plan. I feel like it was in mid-January, ultimately was the first time that they discharged me with this plan. And things went okay, you know, as okay as you can expect them to be given the circumstances for probably about 5 days or a week, something like that. And one day they had an intern come with the nurse that had been coming to clean the dressing in the wound for the IV PICC line. And the nurse that day tried to have the intern change the dressing instead of the nurse doing it herself. The dressing is kind of, like the gauze and the tape and stuff like that they use to cover the IV line so it doesn't get infected, things of that nature. So this intern clearly just did not know what she was doing at all. I really don't like to bash workers, especially healthcare workers. They're amazing. Like, I've dealt with a lot of them over the course of this whole experience, and just in general, they're, by and large, great people. They do amazing charitable work, and I have almost nothing but good things to say for them. But this particular woman just had no idea what she was doing, period, and I'll stand by that statement. She took the dressing, and she ripped the tape up that was holding the needle, the IV PICC hooked in needle into my vein. She ripped the tape up, and it wasn't coming up. She was struggling with it, so she tried to pull it harder, and she pulled it so hard that the needle that was in my vein, hooked in and up into my vein, started to pull the vein itself, so much so that I saw the vein starting to lift up into my skin, so I could start to see the vein pulling up. And I screamed so loud. I've never been in that much pain in my life at that point. And I screamed, and I said, "You," and I swore, and I felt really bad. I knew, obviously, it wasn't intentional, but it was just so painful. And ultimately, this must have messed up the PICC line instead of my arm, because she ended up finishing, she cleaned it, rewrapped it, but the issue was that the antibiotics now were slowly leaking out of the wound in my arm instead of going up into my veins and into my bloodstream. I could tell this because it slowly started soaking the bandages that were wrapped inside of the clear tape that wraps around the dressing, to the point where it started dripping down. I could tell it was leaking. I'm no medical expert, to be fair, but I am an expert in my body, and I know I have an extreme pain tolerance, and that pain was unbearable. And I had it rebandaged multiple times in the past with no issues, so I had a fairly good idea of how the process was supposed to go. And the intern really just botched it. And it very easily could have cost me my life. So I'm sorry if I'm a little aggravated about it, and if I snapped and happened to have sworn at the intern. But it ended up making me really sick, and I tried to reason with myself that maybe I was still getting enough antibiotics in my system, and that maybe I could make it until my next doctor's visit without having to do something about it, but that didn't end up being the case. A couple days later, my girlfriend and I were leaving my apartment early in the morning, and all of a sudden, I couldn't breathe at all. I went into a near anaphylactic shock, and like couldn't breathe like that level. I had to lay down and slide down my stairs just to get to the bottom of them, because I couldn't stand up straight, and I literally could not stand up straight and just step down the steps. I had to sit on my butt and slide down the stairs, very slowly, mind you, because any movement at all was causing me, I couldn't breathe, so I was almost passing out. So once I got to the bottom of them, my godsend girlfriend, thankfully she was there, had to, help lift me and carry me to the car. I had her bring me straight to Brigham and Women's Hospital, and this time I was hospitalized for another 5-ish months in total. I was still on oxygen, as well as multiple IVs, and bedridden the entire time. again. And this time I was finally scheduled for the heart valve replacement surgery. The original date was supposed to be April 19th, and I had conversations with my loved ones at that point, pretty serious ones, just in case anything were to happen. Although medicine and tech have come so far, there is still a chance that something could have gone wrong and I could have passed. So, I had conversations with my family and made sure all my affairs were in order. Just in case. I had full faith in the team and the surgeons that were going to be doing the operation. But I'd rather have those conversations than not have them, and just cover my bases. So I had them, and the day for the procedure finally came. I wasn't allowed to eat or drink anything after midnight, and so the day came, and I was sitting in the lobby of the surgeon. I was super anxious, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. I was feeling queasy, anxious, hungry, worried, sad, excited, hopeful that things would get better. And finally, an assistant came up to me, and I had been seeing this since about 8 a.m., and this was actually not until about 4 p.m. And the assistant came up to me, and he informed me that the doctor's last surgery ran long, and I was going to have to reschedule for sometime next week, which I did. And in the moment, it was really begrudgingly. I was really, really upset, and now that anxiety that was sitting in my heart was gonna build there and stay with me for another week. I was really upset at the time of this. How could the doctor do this? Why would they reschedule? We had this planned for a fairly long time at this point. This didn't feel right. He must know how serious this is. Things of that nature were all thoughts running through my head. And ultimately, I had a friend, reach out to me and just kind of remind me, like, hey, you'd rather have him be well-rested and, fully ready to do the procedure on you rather than, have a tired surgeon who had been doing surgery all day, try to squeeze an extra one in. Obviously, it's a heart surgery. It's a serious thing. And not to mention that, the person before me deserved all, the best care that they could get as well, and if it was me in their situation, I'd want him to take the extra time with me as well, so, I calmed down a little, obviously, and, finally the day actually came, and after just about an hour or two of waiting that day, they wheeled me in the back and began prepping me for surgery. And honestly, the last thing I remember is being wheeled from the waiting room where they ask you questions into the back room where, they start to give you, like, the gas mask or IV, whatever they did to knock me out. So I remember being wheeled into the back room, and then, bam, I wake up after the surgery. Now, I'm a fairly upfront person, I like to think, and throughout my life I've had problems finding myself depressed. I isolate, I'm overall apathetic. I'd never say I'm suicidal, but ultimately I kind of have just always had this mindset of not caring if I'm alive or dead. I've just kind of also, had this perspective, negative or positive, no matter what I do, how much effort I put in, I just feel like ultimately I'm so small and inconsequential in the grand scheme of things that the overall impact of my actions just must be negligible. The world is so large, the universe is so large, we're just a little tiny dot. So, I certainly have always enjoyed and appreciated and respected things in my life. I have people that I love and care about and that feel the same about me, but overall, I've always felt like I don't necessarily value, my life. But I mention this because this surgery in particular really made me think about this mindset and change it, because I woke up from this intense open heart surgery, and the first thought in my head was, holy crap, I'm alive, and I was excited. I made it. You know, I made it. I get to see my family again. I'm excited for life. I'm excited to be able to call my mom, my dad, let them know I made it, hear their voice. I'm excited to see my girlfriend again. I was grateful. I was so grateful for the doctors that successfully did the surgery, the nursing, the hospital staff that cared for me along the way. Everything kind of culminated into this moment, and I felt so grateful and so happy and humbled to be alive. And I realized that regardless of the outcomes of my actions or what ends up happening, the most important thing and what I really had to focus on, at least for the rest of my time here, is to spend as much time as possible with the people that I love, the people that I care about and that care about me. My parents, my girlfriend, my sisters, my nieces, my friends that have become my family, and enjoy the time that I have, no matter how long or short it is, the best that I can, because it's all going to end for all of us sooner or later. Life's short. Enjoy it. The second thought in my head was, holy crap, I'm alive. Ow. Insane, almost immediate amounts of pain. I was on IV fentanyl, oxycodone, methadone, ketamine, Tylenol, a bunch of muscle relaxers I don't even remember. But I could still feel some pretty severe pain. You know, they sawed through my chest. And, you know, yeah, just severe pain. A doctor came in, you know, do you know what day it is, year it is, all the normal questions, and I remember them removing the oxygen tubes from my nose, and at this point I had been relying on them for months. I've needed them to breathe, so I kind of panicked for a second. I said, oh, no, no, and he said, oh, no, you don't need it anymore, and he turned away and walked out of the room, and he left it far enough away that I couldn't reach it, so I kind of panicked for a second, but I sat there, and I breathed just normal air, and I no longer needed it. It was amazing. But I knew I was in for a long recovery, and I was at a point now where I had to start building back the muscle in my legs, my arms, fix, you know, the atrophy and damage that had been done from not walking or standing or doing anything at all, but laying in bed for 9 months. No exaggeration, I wasn't even able to leave my bed to use the bathroom towards the end. But, you know, with my support network, my girlfriend, my family, a few at-home health aides after the surgery, I started my road to recovery. At first it was hard and embarrassing. I was sick from all the meds I was on. I looked frail. I think I was down to 110 pounds, something along those lines, which is really small for me. I remember literally falling to the ground in like the light amount of snow that was on the ground, trying to walk from the car to my house when I first got home. I remember throwing up in my living room and crying because I felt like even after coming so far, I was still so weak and so sick. But I knew that if I kept working at it, I would slowly get back my muscle mass, and I'd feel better. And after a few months, I was walking. You know, I no longer needed the oxygen. I didn't have the bag of antibiotics I had to carry around anymore. I didn't have the IV PICC line in. You know, I was on the road to normality, and it slowly, you know, got really excited, and I got my life back. I don't think stamina-wise I'll ever fully be back to my peak, you know, physical abilities, but I'm at a point now where I've been out of the hospital since early May. I can walk, I can do stairs, I can even lightly jog. I'm back to working. I'm on some meds, probably for the rest of my life, which is totally fine. But I'm feeling much better, and even most days not nauseous at all. I owe my life to my mother, my father, my amazing, supportive girlfriend, the countless number of men, women, doctors, nurses, staff who spent days, weeks, months doing sophisticated procedures, helping me maintain, recover, and ultimately grant me the ability to live my life, and spending time with me during a time when I was isolated, alone in the hospital. This was during COVID, so we were allowed no visitors, not even a single one. No one in my family could come see me for months. The only people I had were these doctors and nurses. But for now, the American Heart Association is hosting a walk on October 30th. Hopefully I'm going to get this video out either on the 29th or the 30th, so the walk is either going to be today or tomorrow. I will be doing this walk and have been fundraising for it for the last few months. Donations are always welcome. Even if you happen to see this video after the walk happened, you can feel free to donate to the American Heart Association. It's all for the same cause. You know, some of my support network will be joining me for this walk. It is a remote walk, so you can do it from anywhere. People are recording themselves on the route. You know, there's a lot of fundraising and momentum behind it. I'm super excited to be able to do it and be able to take part of it. You know, and any of the funds raised go towards funding the American Heart Association and the amazing work that they do. They do research that aids in breakthroughs in medicine and technology, and will and does continue to save countless lives, myself included, as well as contribute to those in need of things like the very mitral valve heart replacement that saved my life that I just had done. If you feel like donating anything at all, no matter how small, it's greatly needed and appreciated. Of course, don't donate if it puts you in any kind of compromising financial position at all. If you can't afford to, do not do it. If you can, that's amazing. Thank you so much. You know, there's a million details and little stories and things that I missed along the way. You know, I might come back and do a few videos on a few of the stories that have happened along the way, but if you do feel like donating, any of the links that you can find will be down below in the description. I'll try to link my specific fundraiser and then a general link for the American Heart Association, hopefully, but I'm sure you guys can figure it out if you do. This is overall, I think, a good place to kind of wrap up the overview of this story. Thank you for listening. And I'll just leave this here. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and for now, I'm out to go live my life. Peace.